Welcome attendees and industry friends, and thanks for joining us today for this incredible event with Catalyst. Welcome, ladies. I'm super proud to welcome Joy Ohm, Vice President, Knowledge Architect, and Writer for Catalyst, who will be walking us through today's session. Joy collaborates with colleagues in Research and Development Department to conceptualize, write, and manage Catalyst cutting-edge knowledge products. She's also the leader of the Leading for Equity and Inclusion strategic pillar, which is the vehicle through which Catalyst partners with organizations like eXp Realty to transform how they drive gender equity, fairness, and inclusion in the workplace globally. She's committed to making Catalyst's unique findings and perspectives accessible and inspiring for everyone. Welcome, Joy.
Hi, it's great to be here.
We're glad to have you. I also want to give an introduction and a very warm welcome to Wendy Forsyth, eXp's new Chief Marketing Officer, who joined us just last week. And Wendy brings over 20 years of experience in the real estate industry, including executive roles at firms like Compass and HomeSmart International. Wendy brings a wealth of industry knowledge and expertise to her new position at eXp Realty, where she will oversee all aspects of the company's marketing strategy, including brand management, advertising, digital marketing, and public relations. Welcome, Wendy. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Jessica. I am thrilled to be here. And thank you so much for hosting this great event today. And Joy, I have so enjoyed learning about Catalyst and am so excited for the partnership and the relationship that you have with us here at eXp. And we're just going to learn a lot from your insights and guidance. And we just are really fired up about this. So thanks everybody for tuning in today and listening.
Yeah, super excited to have you, Joy. And before I pass it over to you, I want everyone to know that we'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end. So the best practice is to write the questions that you have in the live chat as you think of them. We'll make sure to scroll through and grab and collect those questions so we can present them to Joy at the end. So enjoy the session. And Joy, again, welcome and thank you for leading this powerful session today. We're excited to have you.
Great. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much for the introduction. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about unleashing women and women's potential and the Catalyst effect. And this is really the theme that Catalyst has been focused on this year for International Women's Day and Women's History Month in March. So we're excited to be extending that through April with you all here today. If we could go to the next slide. For those of you who may not be familiar with Catalyst, we are a global nonprofit supported by some of the world's major corporations, including yours. And our goal is to build more inclusive workplaces with a special focus on gender equity. So we believe that if we can make workplaces work for women, they'll actually be better for everyone and we'll all benefit. So we've been doing this work for more than 60 years. And, unfortunately, there's still a lot of work to do. And these last few years especially have reinforced the importance of the work ahead of us and given us new opportunities to accelerate change, with COVID, all the advances in AI, talent shortage, great resignation, and then everything that's come after that. We've had a lot of changes. And so, we're taking this opportunity to pause and to ask people like you to commit to making more sweeping systemic change through small intentional actions so that there's a ripple effect, not just during, Women's History Month or the month after, but the whole year through. So that's what we're going to be doing today. If we could go to the next slide. Yep, the agenda. We are going to be talking about the context of women in the workplace, looking at some of what Catalyst research says, and then talking about some actions. What can you do in your workplace? So we'll move ahead to the setting the context. Next slide. So just overall, this is to give you a big picture in the United States, what the state of women in the workforce is. So here's what we call the Catalyst pyramid for the US workforce. And you can see that at the bottom, we have the percentage of women in the total workforce, and then going up the percentage of women, and it gets, the numbers get smaller and smaller, which makes it into sort of a pyramid shape. And you can see, women are more or less equal at the bottom of the pyramid, but then when we get higher, although at the CEO level, we're at a record high of 8.2% in the S&P 500, but that's nowhere near 50% parity, right? So if we had gender parity in our workplaces, this triangle shape would actually be a square. We would have the same percentage, going up every level of the organization. And, so that's what we're aiming for in the work that we're doing. Next slide. And also, it's important to note that while the differences between men and women in representation are, very clear, as we just saw, the share of representation of women of color as compared to white women is also very different. So you can see here, this data is from the 2022, women of color held 19% of entry-level positions and few advanced to leadership. We had 14% at manager level, 10% at director senior manager level, 8% at VP, and 6% at SVP, and only 5% in C-suite positions. So you can see here that what we saw in the previous slide, that women as a whole, have fewer of the positions as we go up. And then if we look into the women's share, we see that women of color are holding a smaller and smaller share themselves as we go up, and the share that they lose as they climb up is much greater than the share that white women lose. So this shows us that women of color are facing not just barriers related to their gender, but also barriers related to their race. And that affects which women are the ones that make it all the way up to the top. So we're not just, here to make progress for women generally. We want to make progress for women of all backgrounds and all kinds, not just, a few lucky ones. So, now we're going to move on to what the Catalyst research says in terms of what some of the common myths are for the barriers that women face. And so here we've got on the slide 6 myths. These come from what Catalyst has heard in our, 60 plus years working with organizations and talking to people. We hear a lot of people naming these myths as reasons why women aren't making it up to the top. And so you'll see I sort of categorize them in 3 ways. So on the left-hand column, the left 3 have to do with women and their relationships to those in power. So women don't have mentors, women aren't making connections with people in positions of power and influence, and women aren't learning the unspoken rules of their organization. Then the second bucket, I would say, are the 2 on the top, on the right-hand column, about women's ambition being questioned and scrutinized. So they don't seek high-profile assignments to accelerate their career trajectory, or they're not making it known that they have a desire to advance, and they don't toot their own horns, so to speak. And then the last one in the bottom right, women don't support one another. So we're going to dive in today to a couple of these and talk about, what the reality is. So next slide. The first one is the myth that women have too few mentors. So we hear this one a lot, and that women don't have enough mentors, and that's why they're not able to ascend to the top levels of the corporate ladder. But we've done a long series of research looking at high potential women and men and comparing their experiences in what we call a longitudinal study. So we went back to the same people over and over again to track their careers, to find out, what their career opportunities were and how they were advancing up in their chosen career. And we found that actually high potential women were more likely to have a mentor in their career than a man. But the men with active mentoring relationships received more promotions than women. So that's pretty important. And what we saw is that actually women do tend to have actually too many mentors. And we heard from one participant that women tend to be mentored to death. Next slide. So if mentoring wasn't making the difference, what does? And what we found through our research was that it's what we call sponsorship. And here I want to talk about, these different types of people that you might have in your career who are helping you and coaching you and mentoring you and sponsoring you. But what is the difference? So this is at Catalyst how we think about these roles. A coach provides guidance for your development, often focused on interpersonal skills like active listening or specific situations. Whereas a mentor also provides guidance and advice that's important for your personal and professional development, but they're not necessarily in your organization, and they're not necessarily out there talking about you. Whereas a sponsor is an advocate for you. So they are in a position of power, and they're using their influence to intentionally help you advance. So they are actively advocating for you at the decision-making table when it comes to development opportunities and promotions. And they're getting you access to those critical development opportunities and jobs. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. But they're the ones that are talking about you in the room where it happens. They're ambitious for you, and they're focused on your advancement and creating opportunities for you. And when they are advocating for you, they are putting their reputation on the line and placing a bet on your future performance. They're saying, like, Jessica, yes, she's the one that's perfect for this job. And, then Jessica, it's on you to perform really well and prove them right? So, they're the ones who are opening the doors and advocating for you to get the projects that'll enhance your position and your visibility. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see we have a quote here from one of our former board members, Gord Nixon, who is a former president and CEO of RBC, bank up in Canada. He said that people tend to incorrectly use the words mentor and sponsor interchangeably. We've all had mentors who've offered our advice, but sponsors are the people inside our company who have helped us get to senior levels. Sponsors are what you really need to succeed. So, next myth, women don't seek high-profile assignments. So we researched this in a report that examined the impact of leadership development, both formal programs and on-the-job experiences on high potential's career advancement. And we specifically investigated whether women and men get equal access to these experiences that are critical for advancement. And we found that what we call hot jobs are crucial for advancing high potentials further and faster. And these hot jobs are the large and highly visible projects, really big deals, mission critical roles, and if you're in corporate and international experiences. So they predict advancement, but our findings showed that women had less access to these hot jobs than men. So it follows that if you're not getting these hot jobs, then you're not going to get advanced at the same rates as somebody else who is getting them. So next slide. The reality was that women and men had different, like I said before, they were getting different access to these hot jobs, and the hot jobs that they got different in quality as well. So, for example, the budget of projects that men reported working on were more than twice the budgets of the women's projects. Men's projects teams had more than 3 times as many employees staffed to them as women's. More men than women reported getting C-suite visibility to a very great extent on these projects. And more men than women reported that their projects involved a high level of risk to the company. And then even in terms of relocating, among people who said that they were very willing to relocate, more men than women had an employer-initiated international assignment, and more more women than men, of the ones who had indicated that they were willing to relocate, more women than men were never even offered the opportunity for this type of hot job, even though they were no more likely than men to turn down the opportunities. So we see that there are differences in the way women and men are being identified for hot jobs. And even when they are identified for hot jobs, there's differences in what type of hot jobs they get. So we see that women and diverse talent who work hard and play by the rules and are often overlooked when it comes to the plum assignments and big promotions that are necessary to advance to senior leadership. That's what one of our research participants said. And you can see how this overlaps with the conversation about sponsorship, because a sponsor is often the one who can get you one of those hot jobs. So that's where the sponsors come into play as well. It's okay. So moving on, in the same research series, I just want to share a few other findings we found there. We found that men who had a mentor received $9,260 more in their first post-MBA job than women with a mentor. So they were starting right out the gate. Men are being paid more. Men are more likely to take a first job assignment at a higher rank with a greater level of responsibility than women, and mentoring helped these men get these upper level positions more than women. So again, these are all like high potential MBA graduates. So, there really isn't much of a difference in terms of their previous experience and their, academic credentials. So it's really interesting that we see such huge differences here. We see that men receive more promotions and greater salary growth over time. And for men, each promotion amounted to about an extra 21% in compensation. And for women, each promotion only amounted to an extra 2% in compensation. And that is really striking to me. Even when I saw this data, I was blown away at the difference. And this is, again, we talk a lot when we're talking about gender equity, about the gender pay gap, and this is where this comes in, as you can see as well. Yep. So now moving on to the last myth we're going to talk about, the idea that women don't support other women. This is often called the Queen Bee syndrome. There are whole movies about Mean Girls and, all sorts of other corporate movies where women are undermining each other. But, the reality is that women are more likely to develop others, especially other women. And we found this in our research. So going to the next slide. We found that among our high potential women that we were studying, 65% of women who received career development support are developing new talent, compared to 56% of men. 73% of women are developing other women, compared to 30% of men developing women. And looking at people who are putting in long hours, 76% of women are developing others versus 57% of men. And 64% of women at the senior executive level are developing others, compared to 30% of individual contributors. So women are trying to transform the workplace by sustaining this type of virtuous cycle of women helping other women. But we need to do more, and we need men to join in. We need everybody to be joining in to be working toward these shared goals that we have. So just to wrap up this section, we do see that women have mentors, but they need more sponsors. We see that women are ambitious, but they need more access to the really big deals that are going to help them advance in their careers. And we need women and men to be helping other women. So what can you do? This is where we get to the fun part, the actions. So number one, be a sponsor. So there's a lot that we can all do in terms of being sponsors. We do talk about sponsors giving their sponsees access to the next level job or a special project or some kind of deal that's going to help them advance their career. And remember, any of us can do that for anybody. Even if you just started at the company yesterday, maybe there's somebody who's in college that you know who you can sponsor into an internship, or there's some other younger person that you can be a sponsor to. So it's not, this isn't just something that, you know, VPs are doing, or executive VPs, or, you know, really senior level people. Anybody at any level can be doing this. And so you should be thinking about, you know, what are you doing as a sponsor now? Like, who are you currently sponsoring? How can you expand that circle? How are you making judgments about, you know, the readiness of the people that you're sponsoring, their dependability, the compatibility with the work that you're doing or the work that you're recommending them for? And what assumptions are you making? You know, a lot of us might assume that a certain person will or won't be interested in a certain opportunity. And the best thing you can do as a sponsor is to be curious about them and just go and ask them, right? You know, especially it's important to look beyond your sort of immediate circle of people, because just by human nature, we tend to associate with people who are similar to ourselves. And so it's important to make sure that the people you're sponsoring are, you know, a diverse group of people who don't all look like you, who have different experiences from you. You know, it's a lot of times people like to sponsor people who remind you of a younger version of yourself, right? But it's important. That's great, and definitely do that. But also, you know, be aware that you should also be looking around and trying to sponsor other people who look maybe different from your career path as well. And you know, for the organization, sponsorship is a win-win for everybody who's involved. So obviously it's a win for the person who's being sponsored, because they get access to these new opportunities that they might not have been able to have access to, or they might get to meet different people that they wouldn't have normally met in the regular course of their job. It's beneficial to the sponsor because, you know, they're also hopefully using this relationship to grow and learn. They're looking out to have access to different people. They are getting to become known as a person who can spot and nurture talent. And our research tells us that they get personal and professional satisfaction as well. And then, of course, for the organization, it's great because your people are helping to identify talent and take new opportunities where they can shine and advance. Next slide. So what's something else you can do? Well, we did a separate batch of research on inclusive leadership. And so this is something that we looked at to develop this model that you can see on the slide of what does inclusive leadership look like? What does it look like from the manager side in terms of the behaviors, inclusive leadership behaviors? And what does it look like from the employee side? Like, what are the actual experiences that determine whether you're experiencing inclusion? And so we developed this inclusive leadership model that powerfully predicts inclusion among employees in a diverse cross-section of countries and populations. And I want to just call out here that we did look at this in terms of managers and direct reports, but again, same with sponsorship. Like, everybody here is a leader. Everybody can be behaving with these leadership behaviors, and that just makes everybody in the organization feel more included. So I'm going to dive into them a little more deeply, dive into the elements of this leadership model. If you could go to the next slide. So I'm going to start at the bottom with the hallmarks of inclusion, because I think this is the part that everybody can relate to. No matter what kind of job you've been, or even at school or in your community, we've all had these experiences to different extents depending on the context. So these are the 5 experiences of inclusion. So one is valued. You feel appreciated and respected for your unique perspectives and talents. Trusted. You make meaningful contributions and are influential in decision making. Authentic. You can bring your full self to work and express aspects of your work, of yourself, that may be different from your peers. And then psychological safety, we actually noticed in our research that there were two different aspects of this. So one we called latitude. This is when you feel free to hold different views and make mistakes without being penalized. And then risk-taking. This is when you feel secure enough to address tough issues and take risks. So this is a little hard sometimes to parse out the difference between these two pieces of psychological safety. So I want to dig into that a little bit. So one is the latitude component distinguishes how people's attitudes about doing things may seem risky, versus the risk-taking component is looking at people's ability to engage in risk-taking behaviors. So we've seen this distinction show up in the real world as the extent, for example, to which employees report experiencing these two can really vary wildly. So, for example, an employee can believe that they will experience reprisal for taking a risk. So that means they have low psychological safety latitude, but they might decide to take those risks anyway. So that means that they have high risk taking, right? By contrast, someone could believe that there wouldn't be reprisal, so they have high latitude, but then they still hesitate to actually engage in the behavior. So that's low risk taking. And I'm sure that you can all think of some, maybe experiences in your work careers or your personal lives where these two different aspects of psychological safety have come into play. And moving on to the next slide, and the core leadership behaviors. So we saw these sort of categorizing themselves into two different areas. One we call leading outward, which is what leaders do to ensure that team members are treated fairly, empowered, and able to flourish. And the core behaviors here are accountability, ownership, and allyship. So really working with your teammates, your direct reports to make sure that everybody is being held accountable for the work that they are responsible for, that they have ownership over their projects so you're not micromanaging, and that you're demonstrating allyship and supporting people when they need it, no matter what their identity is. And then the other three fall into this category of what we call leading inward. And these are, the actions that require a leader to take a harder look at, internally at who they are and their inner ability to act courageously, to learn, and to self-reflect. And so this is where curiosity comes into play. So, being curious about yourself, your assumptions, your the way you've been, brought up or taught to do certain things. It's not always the only way or the most perfect right way, right? So being curious about why you're doing certain things, and being curious about your the people on your team that you're working with, being curious about your leaders, being curious about your organizational practices and policies, and just asking those questions about, like, how could we be doing this better? What are other people's experiences? If you're mentoring or sponsoring somebody, being curious about what they actually are aspiring to in their career and their own personal development, and not making assumptions, right? And then that often gets tied into with humility, which is, a lot of times if we're being curious, that means we might hear something we weren't expecting to hear, or that's really different from what we thought. And that's where humility comes in, to be able to say, I never thought of it that way, or maybe that's something we need to rework or redesign in our workplace, and having the ability to listen humbly to what somebody is telling you. And then courage, this is the ability to call out something that maybe an aha moment, or something that, because you've been curious and you've been humble in listening to other people's experiences, you need to, and everybody's sort of like giving you a similar piece of feedback that something's not working, for example, then having the courage to speak up to whoever is in charge of, that process or that practice and say like, hey, this isn't working for a lot of people. Can we do it differently? And being able to take the risk of changing something, maybe, that's been a part of the way you do your work for a long time, but taking the risk and having the courage to advocate for something different that maybe will be more inclusive for everybody. And again, just to reiterate, this is something that all of us can be doing, even if you don't have manager in your title or you don't have direct reports. Like, these are behaviors that all of us can be doing to create a more inclusive workplace in our organizations. And next slide. Though, our research was focused on managers, and what we did find is that people's experiences of an inclusive workplace, 45% of their experiences of an inclusive workplace are explained by these managerial inclusive leadership behaviors. So that is a huge percentage, and it just goes to show how important it is to behave, with these leading inward and leading outward behaviors to help everybody on your team and in your organization feel more included at work. Next slide. So that kind of wraps up the actions. If you want to move on after this call and take some more actions yourself, you can go to our website and take our Are You an Inclusive Leader quiz. We have a lot of other resources, the reports that I mentioned that I was talking about earlier. We have a lot of tools about inclusive leadership. We have a really great series of products we call Flip the Script that are really action oriented on things that people say that maybe come across as microaggressions or aren't so inclusive, and then we give you a suggestion of what you could say instead. We have got a lot of resources on sponsorship and how you can lead with those sponsorship mindset. And then, if you want to keep engaged with Catalyst, you can sign up with our newsletter. Next slide. Here, if you click the QR code, you'll get to our website. Everybody with the EXP email address has access to everything on our website. So you just need to register with your work email, and you will get supporter access to all of our tools and resources, webinar recordings, etc. And it's a really great benefit that your organization gives to you to provide this type of resource for you on a wide range of topics related to creating more inclusive workplaces. So next slide is just questions. We're going to move it on to the Q&A, and I think we're going to bring Jessica back to moderate the Q&A. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Joy. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I really appreciate you being here. And we had a lot of questions coming through, so definitely want to pose a few to you. So you provided so much strategic advice for leaders and how we can lead better and more effectively. Lots of strategy there. We had a question from an agent. She says, I'm 4 years into real estate as an entrepreneur, and as a minority, she's finding it hard to grow and get support. Any advice for her on how she can take steps to connect and get into the right rooms with the right leaders, and any advice there?
Yeah. So this sounds like you're not feeling included into the networks and the people who have access to a lot of the opportunities or the even just unwritten rules or information that you need to be successful in your job. And so what I would say to that is to, look for allies, look for people who you can build relationships with and who can introduce you to others who can also be allies to you and who can bring you along and share that important information. Because it's true, there's a lot of, when you start a new industry or new job, new organization, there's a lot in terms of the culture, for example, that you may not necessarily know, and they don't tell you when they're onboarding you. It's not something against, this particular organization. It's just a thing that happens in most organizations. And so it is important to be able to make those connections and maybe invite, people out for coffee. I think that people a lot of times really are open to those coffee chats just to like meet new people. And if they're not reaching out to you, it's probably less because they don't want to. It's just because they don't have time, or they're busy, or they don't know what your role is. And so I find that people are usually pretty welcoming of that kind of thing. And if you can, it's really worth the investment. I think a lot of times, especially people younger in their careers, don't realize how important it is to invest in those types of relationships, to find out that to have them for their entire career potentially, and to gain that access to that information that you need to be able to understand how things really work around here, or to hear about a new opportunity that maybe isn't public yet. It's important to spend time doing that.
I agree. It can be surprising that many people have never been asked to be a mentor or a sponsor in this case. And so it could be surprising if you reach out to folks how often they'll say yes and be excited that they were invited. We have another question from a male in the audience. He says, as a male entrepreneur, how can I be more effective as an ally for women who want to see more women in leadership?
Yeah, great question. And we'd love to hear that.
Right.
I think, it's about making sure that opportunities are being distributed sort of equally and equitably. And that a lot of times when we see gender bias showing up in an organization, it's not any one particular decision. It's just sort of the accumulation. When you look at the numbers as a whole across the organization, you can see like, okay, women are spending longer at a particular level before they're getting promoted than compared to men, or a lot of women are dropping out at a particular level. And so it's these, when we look at the numbers, we can see that it's more of a systemic issue. And so whatever you can do as a manager or as an organization to sort of de-bias the processes for promotion or performance reviews, or how people are chosen for training programs or hot jobs like we were talking about. And so how do you make it less about what a particular person's feeling is about, who should be invited to a meeting or an opportunity or a training, and more about like hard numbers and rubrics about like, well, did these people hit their goals? And if they did, then they get XYZ training, And so I think as a manager, it's important to look out for those things. And then just, sort of on an interpersonal basis, is making sure that you're, understanding what people who are different from you, whether, you're a man and you're talking to a woman, like what are their experiences at work? What are they, what opportunities have they had? What would they like to have? What do they see other people in their position or in their network experiencing, and just learning more, like I said, about being curious, like that's really important, I think. And the more you just really talk to other people who have had different experiences than from you and learn about their experiences, the more equipped you'll be to advocate for them and to advocate for changes in your organization that would benefit everybody.
Yeah, that's a big one. I also want to point everyone to the resources on Catalyst site. If you go to if you're an eXp Realty agent or a staff member and you go to Workplace and you type the word Catalyst in the top left box and search Catalyst, you'll find the link where you can log in and check out the resources. And I would invite and encourage anyone to check out some of the trainings and tools there. I think just putting yourself through the experiences that you have on Catalyst. You have some really great case studies on there, Joy, and I feel they're really effective to show examples where you can kind of learn in that environment a little bit better than just heavy reading. But you have some really great examples of how, a male could be in that position and how they made a difference and what the impact was, what the result was, et cetera. So great resources there. We have another question from Sheeran. Let's see. I'd love for Joy to talk specifically about how this applies in the real estate, or how it could apply in the real estate space, where most realtors are independent contractors, and there's no corporate hierarchy per se. How can we influence and make an impact as realtors amongst each other?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the actions that I was talking about, although, we research them from the angle of, managers and sponsors and that kind of thing in a more corporate setting, I do think that they are 100% applicable in any setting, no matter where you are. Even I find myself using my inclusive leadership behaviors with my kids,
Right.
or trying to. It's hard sometimes, but, I think people want to feel included. You want to be able to build those relationships. Real estate is all about relationships, right?
Right.
And whether it's your buyer, your seller, your corporate partners, whoever you're working with, like they want to feel heard, and they want to feel valued, and they want to feel like you are including them in every step of the process, right? And so I think these behaviors can help you in all of that. And I'll just stop there.
Yeah, no, great advice. I would say too, before you are able to build or get yourself into the room with more people that really want to see you grow and be a sponsor in your life, you could add a little bit to your diet in terms of what you're listening to, what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're studying, who you're paying attention to. Any advice on some leaders outside of the real estate space that we could be paying attention to, that could add some inspiration into our life that you're inspired by?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said before, I'll plug our newsletter again for people who want to hear more about what Catalyst has to say. I mean, there are a ton of great organizations out there doing work on different aspects of inclusion. And I do recommend, whether it's a podcast or just looking on even, Harvard Business Review or other resources online. There's so much. I don't even really know where to start in terms of naming things. But I would say, sort of building on what you said, to look up some resources about, people who are different from you, who maybe haven't experienced whatever you've experienced, and learn about, what their history is and what their struggles might have been and what opportunities that they've been given. And I think there's just so much that, a lot of us didn't learn growing up in school. A lot has happened since we've been in school, if you're as old as I am. And there's just even what's going on in the news right now, there's a lot to learn about how people are experiencing the world and then the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question. What qualities or skills have you observed in women who really succeed as entrepreneurs? I'll say that, some of the soft skills like communication, something that as realtors, we're not studying as much as we should, as often as we should to excel. What other skills like resilience would you say are the qualities of successful entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, one thing that has come up a lot is empathy, especially in the last few years since the pandemic. People, I think, around the world have really started to realize how important empathy is in a leader of any kind. And, it's something that maybe was more discounted in the past. But we're realizing that it's really a superpower that leaders can have, and helps people understand, or develop the human side of relationships with the people that you're working with every day. And I think for any leader, you need to have empathy to understand, where the people you're working with are coming from, and when to push and when to pull back, and when to how to get the most out of them. You're not going to be able to do that if you're not using your empathy. And we, you mentioned soft skills, and empathy, I think, is often considered a soft skill, but I don't know. I don't really like the term soft skills because it sounds like they're sort of mushy and not as important as the hard skills. So I think we're still struggling to find a different term to use for those kind of behaviors. But maybe just our human connecting behaviors are the ones. Communication is the one you mentioned. That's key. You can't have empathy without communication, right?
Or show it anyway. Yeah.
And so I think those are really clear. And then just one other one is, I think anybody who's successful has a vision, right? They have a vision for where they want to go, where they want the organization to go, and how they're going to get there. And then, using their human communication skills, they are bringing people along with them and helping people feel included with them to achieve that vision.
I love that. So let's imagine that it's you're a leader and you're meeting with someone for the first time, someone new in your department that you'll be managing. What are one or two questions, like curious questions? Well, number one, we can't teach people how to genuinely care, right? You have to come to the table genuinely caring. That's number one. But two, in terms of building that deeper connection and really making people feel seen when you first meet with them and engage with them, what would be some good, curious questions to start with to get to know people?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, I like to know about, how a person ended up where they are, sort of what their journey has been. You don't need to know everything about their life story, of course, but sort of the high points on how they got there. And then I think it's important to know, like, what are people's aspirations, right? Like, not just where have you been, but where do you want to go? And then I think, there's also questions about sort of, what kind of learner are you? How do you want to receive feedback? How do you want to what's your working style, those kind of things, so that you can match, and also to share your own as the manager. Like, well, I tend to, be on more in the afternoon than in the morning, or, whenever your best like on times are, or how you like to receive information. Is it on email? Is it on a phone call? Is it through a chat? There's so many different ways to communicate these days. It's important to get aligned on, what's the most effective way for the two of you as a team and as your overall team as a whole.
Yeah. So you've worked with so many big companies, and without, of course, naming any, I'm sure you've come across people that are aware and believe that they need to make changes, but just aren't really quite ready to implement the things that they're learning from you. How have you moved past some of those challenges with people, truly having to have that internal discovery to change their beliefs? How have you worked through some of those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually have a really effective program called MARC, and it stands for Men Advocating Real Change. And this is a program where we it's not just for men, it's for anybody of any gender, but it's focused on gender partnership and how the work that we're doing to dismantle gender stereotypes and advance gender equity, it's not just something that we're doing for women to help women. Like, it actually benefits everybody. Like, all of us, men as well as women, struggle with fitting into gender stereotypes and expectations about, being the breadwinner, or having to man up. And there's just so much. Like I said, we have entire workshops about this. So
Right.
I can't really get into it in as much detail as I would like to. But what we've found is a lot of people who've started to think about it in this way have really had an aha moment about like it's this is something that will help all of us as humans, and it's not necessarily. It's great if you want to do it for your daughter, for example, or your niece or whatever, but do it for yourself too, because it's for you. It's for your colleagues in the workplace right now, not just for the younger generation. It's for all of us. And we really can, with all of us making, the small changes, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this hour, can make a larger ripple effect of change in all of our organizations that can happen right now.
So you've experienced and seen people go through this training and really make a change. What I notice is in many companies, there are things being done behind closed doors, such as being a sponsor for someone and advocating for someone behind a closed door, that are really difficult to measure and track. And what you do at Catalyst is amazing because you actually do track and measure those metrics. What are some tips you could give to large organizations to be able to measure and track so that you could showcase the effectiveness of being a sponsor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do at Catalyst, everything we do is based on data. And we obviously encourage our organizations that we work with to be gathering a lot of data as well to be able to demonstrate exactly that, where they're doing great and where they can do better. And so it is about making sure that your organization has the right tools to be able to be measuring whatever it is you want to measure. If you have a sponsorship program or people are sponsoring, then making sure that you're gathering that data and then that you're looking at it with the right lenses, not just by gender, but also by race or location or, business unit, whatever your relevant categories are, to find out that if, like I said before, opportunities are being shared equitably, or if there are differences, and if so, what are the right actions to take to try to address that. And you might not get it right the first time, but that you're always gathering data and you're learning, and then you can try something new the next time.
Awesome. I love that. And in the shoes of someone that is receiving sponsorship from someone, what advice would you give them in terms of at what point they can do the same for others? At what point can you identify that you have something to give back and really feel worthy of helping someone else in the same way that you're receiving sponsorship?
Yeah. I mean, like I said before, I think anybody can do this. I think everybody here is worthy of being a sponsor.
Exactly. There is no act that is too small.
Yeah, please don't think that you're not worthy. You are worthy of being a sponsor. Like I said, even if it's to a high school student or a college student or somebody else who's, working on getting their degree, you can sponsor them, depending on what opportunities are, available to you and that you have access to in terms of introducing people. And it's not just about, putting somebody into a role, a job, or a project or a deal. It can also just be about introducing people to other people. So opening doors to contacts, to broadening their networks, and then giving them the opportunity to, have a coffee connection with somebody you've introduced them to who could help them later on, even if it doesn't end up with a new job right now.
Exactly. And all of this, everything you've said is a masterclass in real estate, truly. I don't know if you know that or not, but it all applies, the way that we're working with our colleagues, the way staff members are working with their managers and vice versa. So thank you so much, Joy. Really enjoyed having you here today. And everyone, if you could please check out catalyst.org. There was a QR code before, but you can, I'm surely if you just go to catalyst.org realty.org. And then if you are an eXp Realty agent or staff member, you can check out Catalyst in Workplace, and there's a link there to get to actually be able to log in and access all of the I guess you wouldn't call it private, but the tools when you're a sponsor of Catalyst like eXp Realty. We've got access to all the tools and trainings. There's phenomenal stuff in there, ways to get connected, maybe even some activities you could have some conversations with your team or your group in the office. So thank you again, Joy. We look forward to having another workshop with you and really invite you to come anytime. It was truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great questions, everybody. It was great.